guy is an absolute superstar, and you've seen him, he's just like all over the media like a cheap suit, but in a good way. Dr. Michael Carr-Gregg is one of Australia's highest profile psychologists. Now, if you have not seen him or heard him, television, radio, news, paper columnist, you've been cryogenically frozen or dead, okay? Now, where it all started is in 1984, he wrote his PhD on adolescents with cancer and founded Canteen in Australia and New Zealand. And Canteen's been around so long and is so important, I kind of can't even imagine it ever not being there. And I didn't realise that it was Dr. Carr-Gregg who founded it. What an extraordinary work. Now he works in private practice, specialising in the area of parenting adolescents and adolescent mental health, along with a busy, flat-out media schedule. He could do with 3 or 4 body doubles, I think. Television, radio, writing columns for newspapers. He's authored 8 books on parenting and teenagers, and he's currently working on his 9th. So clearly he's an underachiever, and he really should pull his finger out. Really do something with your life. He's held a variety of appointments, including Executive Director of the New Zealand Drug Foundation and Associate Professor in the Department of Paediatrics at the University of Melbourne. He's an ambassador for the National Drugs Campaign, Beyondblue and Reach Out, and was a founding member of the National Centre Against Bullying and chairs their Cyber Safety Committee. Today he's going to talk to us about living with teenagers and how to meet the challenges. And as the mother of a 13-year-old with 2 others who will eventually become teenagers, I'm going to be sitting there with all ears. Please put your hands together and welcome tomorrow's chairperson here at the Mind and Its Potential, Dr. Michael Carr-Gregg.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And can you please just do me a quick favour? Do you know how hard it is to be a chairperson? She has done a fantastic job so far. Could you give her a big round of applause? It's a tough job. However, I'm here to talk about teenagers, and if I could have the first slide up. The question, of course, is an important one. How did I measure up as a teenager? Well, I guess we really need to ask these 2 people, one of whom is still alive and lives in Avalon, New South Wales. He's 92 on the 10th of January next year. These are my parents, and of course, they have a different view to what it is to bring up teenagers than perhaps I had. I actually thought I was perfect, but the trick here is to understand that there is no one-size-fits-all. My father was a British diplomat, my mother a Red Cross nurse, Dad didn't speak any French, Mum didn't speak any English. They met in New York City after the Second World War. Obviously, language was not a problem because my sister was born very shortly afterwards, and so was my brother. And I made my appearance in Melbourne in 1958, and you can see here I always wanted to be a psychologist. Here I am analysing Mum, trying to figure out what's going on. We moved very shortly after to Africa, to Ghana, where I learnt to walk, which I found very useful. From there to Kenya, where I continued my rather pathetic attempts to look like a psychologist. And then my father must have annoyed someone at Whitehall because he got sent to Ulaanbaatar, the capital of Outer Mongolia. Look, fabulous place, ladies and gentlemen, if you're a yak. If you are a 10-year-old boy who wants to go to school, well, the British government had a solution. So most of my adolescence was spent here. This will be familiar to most of you. There is no difference between Hogwarts and the place that they sent me. It was fairly horrific. This indeed was a place I ran away from 33 times. This was my maths teacher, and this, I swear to God, was my English teacher. These people were unbelievable. It's so interesting because I then washed up on the shores of Sydney University, where one of the lead student politicians at the time was Tony Abbott. They always used to say I was one of the only people who'd wander the campus with his IQ score on his stomach. I think that's bullying, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not sure. But then everything went terribly wrong, and I was diagnosed with cancer. I was told that I had 8 weeks to live, which certainly will get your attention, ladies and gentlemen. My parents bought me a house to die in the Marlborough Sounds of New Zealand, which is an awfully beautiful place to die. Unfortunately, for the plans, well, I'm still here. So's the place, which is great. And I then developed this interest in adolescence with cancer and wrote my PhD at the Prince of Wales Children's Hospital right here in Sydney. And I guess I developed, as a result of my adolescence, a real fascination with the period of time we know as adolescence, which used to be anything ending in teen, but now, of course, many of you will know that the Australian Medical Association defines adolescence as anyone aged 10 to 24. So Catherine's just out of that period, which is good. So I've been asked to address a couple of really important questions today. Are teenagers really impossible to live with? I think my parents would say yes. Do parents need a manual? What's the best way to communicate with and understand them? Good luck. How do you effectively tackle those risk-taking behaviours? How do you know when something's gone wrong, and what are the practical tips? Well, that's sort of a postgraduate diploma in adolescent health and welfare, and I've got very little time, so I'm going to get on with it. This is a challenging, ladies and gentlemen, generation. There's no question about it. I would argue they're the most disadvantaged in some respects and advantaged generation. They're certainly nothing like we were. They are not, I think, impossible to live with, although some of the patients that I have seen over the years, their parents have sent me little emails. These are a few selection of quotes I have. One wrote, "If you stand close enough to Angela, you can hear the ocean." Make that of witchy witch. Then, of course, some of my children drink from the fountain of knowledge. Phoebe only gargles. You note these are all girls. And this was a wonderful girl who decided that she would go and get some tattoos. And she told her father that she just wanted to, and she fell asleep. In fact, he wrote at times, "I think my daughter is depriving a village somewhere of an idiot." Not unfair. And I guess it could have been worse. You know, these days, just think of it that way. But my favourite quote of all time was from a parent of a very lazy girl who wouldn't get up in the morning. "It's hard to believe she beat out a million other sperm." So, do parents need a manual? Well, I think, obviously, in the tradition of shameless plugs given up here, my latest book, Surviving Stepfamilies, I describe in this the Brady delusion. All of you will remember the Brady Bunch. Of course, it's not like that, and boy, do you need help. And also, if you happen to be blessed with a teenage girl, I think you also need a manual. Someone once said the two worst times in a woman's life was when she was 14 and her daughter is, and I think that's probably true. So I think many parents find it very difficult to juggle all the demands that they have, and many end up feeling a little bit like this dog, sort of under pressure the whole time, just waiting for catastrophe to occur. The best way, of course, to communicate with adolescents is to understand the developmental perspective. Susan mentioned in her address this morning, which I thought was fabulous, how their brains aren't fully developed. The prefrontal cortex of a young person is not fully developed until the early 20s. She was actually being quite generous. My reading of the data is if you've got a daughter, her prefrontal cortex will be done and dusted at 23. If you've got a boy, you've got another 5 years to wait, which I think is true. I have a 21-year-old. He tells me he's an adult. If he's an adult, I'm Oprah Winfrey. That's all I have to say. But there are some golden rules, and in line with the sort of practical nature of all the talk so far, I just want to give you the absolute, my life experience of the most effective ways of communicating, particularly with those early adolescents. I think they've got an inbuilt bull dust detector. So when you're talking to them, you've got to give them full attention. Make eye contact and focus on their content. They've got a really, really sensitive register if you don't do that. The second thing is to make sure that you sound interested. Your tone must match the content, because if it doesn't, they'll pick it up and they'll see you as a phony. I think thirdly, you have to ask lots of questions. It signals that you are actually interested and engaged in their life, and this obviously is going to stand you in very good stead for later on. One of the keys to resilient young people is the presence in their life of what I call a charismatic adult. You've got to be that charismatic adult. Fourth, I think we need to give them feedback. The structures of their brain that they're operating mostly off is the amygdala. and the amygdala does very, very well when it gets feedback. So you need to basically say, so I see that what you're saying is. That not only tells them that you've heard, but it also gives them the opportunity to clarify what it is that they thought they were saying in the first place, which is often not what they said. Fifthly, well, that's true, I think we've got to recognise that young people are looking for positive strokes. So every time they explain to me, you explain that really well. You do that to your partner and he or she will divorce you. But with adolescents, it's very, very good, particularly early adolescents. General adolescence, I think the most important thing is to shut up. Sometimes saying nothing is a really good idea. Just let it go through to the wicketkeeper. Keep calm. The more you yell, scream and shout at a young person, the more they'll yell, scream and shout back. Absolutely clear. Don't talk too much and listen more. Have you ever listened to yourself? You go on and on and on, and you can actually see the lights go out in their eyes. Speak only 2 sentences at a time. Why? Because that's all they can absorb. They just need time. So keep it short. Humour. The amygdala adores humour as long as it isn't sarcasm or put-downs. You must make sure that if you're going to use humour, that you are funny. That helps. It's really important. And the second thing is to keep it upbeat. I need you to set very clear boundaries, and this is where I think parents of Australia are falling down. This is why I think they have so many difficulties with teenagers. They're not setting limits and boundaries because you're not popular when you do that. But they have got to have limits set for them. Very, very important. I don't believe in trying to set them set them up really with a confrontation or an ultimatum. That just triggers defensiveness and shuts down the very communication you're trying to keep open. The trick of talking with teenagers are 2 words: compromise and negotiate. There will always come a time when you can't do that, and then you just have to say, no, it's because I said so, and walk away. Very important. And only argue over things that matters. No one has ever died of an untidy room, yet we would be able to light up Sydney with a number of parents who argue with their children over trivia. What do I think is important? Anything that's related to their health and safety. So sex, drugs, alcohol, sleep, internet, that sort of stuff, very important. I think giving positive feedback. Thank you so much for not putting the cat in the microwave. That sort of thing. Just look for positives in their lives, ladies and gentlemen. Don't constantly remind them of their past mistakes. Adolescence is all about risk-taking and making mistakes. So we have to basically make sure we're not a carping machine. Talking while doing something together. Best thing I ever do is put the kids in the car, go for a drive. You're going 100K, they can't get out, captive audience. And you don't have to comment on everything. Let some things go by you. I think I said that earlier. So what's different? Well, obviously, they're hitting puberty earlier. How frightening to think that there are some children at the Royal Children's Hospital who basically go into puberty at the age of 7. In 1901 in Sydney, the average girl had her first period at 16 years of age. Today, on average, 12.2. That's on average. So clearly, the stages of childhood development are quite different. What difference does that make? There used to be this thing called childhood. In between childhood and adolescence was this waiting room called latency. That's where young people used to be able to gather their psychological thoughts, hang out within their own gender, learn anger management, problem solving, decision making, how to communicate their own thoughts and feelings. What I think's happened today is that we're seeing a short-circuiting of this period. Kids are just tipping their toes into latency before being whooshed straight into early adolescence by a mass media marketing machine, by some fairly sloppy parenting, and of course by peer pressure on steroids driven by a digital world in which they live. So some of these children that I see have gone straight from the Wiggles to Britney. There's been nothing in between, and I don't think that's good. Why is this happening? Obviously diet, obviously better nutrition, the obesity epidemic, and of course the increased rates of family breakup. All of these are suspects in this dramatic change. So the major message to take away when working with young people is to see their brain as a work in progress. It's sort of unfair to expect teens to have adult levels of organisational skills or decision-making before their brains are finished being built. But I think so many of us look at these huge kids and we think, you must be grown up, but you're not. So it's a very, very important principle to take. See them as a beautiful work in progress, but have this developmental perspective. Sometimes they can be challenging. My kids have often told me to go forth and get multiplied, and you just smile and get on with it. You have to remember that you are their surrogate voice of reason. You have to remember that essentially the frontal lobes aren't located in their brain, they're located in yours. And it's like asking a dog to study physics. It's just not going to happen. Too much freedom is not too good. We need to set those limits and boundaries over those things that matter. So essentially, I am the agony uncle for Girlfriend magazine, which is Australia's leading girls magazine. And I say to all girls, just treat every boy that you meet as about 4 years younger than you mentally, and you will not make a mistake. And I think that's good advice. How do we effectively tackle those thorny issues like sexuality, risky behaviour, laziness, internet use? We basically set limits and boundaries. It's really straightforward. Remember, there's no such thing as a perfect parent. No ducks were injured in the making of this particular. They all survived, all right? But I want you to understand, see, there's the resilient one. That's the one that got through. The other major change, of course, is around technology, and Susan and the panel discussed that this morning. 60 to 90% of the communicating that Catherine's children will do will be digital. And you have to understand that Facebook, the digital peer pressure is enormous. Your credibility, your capacity to stay linked in with what's going on is now basically all digital. They're born with a mouse in their hand. The digital native term which was used earlier today is totally misleading. They aren't born computer literate. They're not well versed in digital citizenship skills. And I think this is a major area for parents to really take the reins of parenting and actively parent. Understand technology is not a choice. These kids have never known life without it. My message to parents around technology is that we can't ban these things because they'll use them anyway. We have to give them the skills, the knowledge, and the strategies to use this technology in a safe, smart, and responsible way. And in the last minute, I have to put in a plea. Really be careful with alcohol. A series of large international studies have showed a clear link now between the earlier kids start drinking and the problems later in life. You double the risk of alcohol dependence at 21. This is the work of Ralph Hinkson from the United States. Please be very, very mindful of that. We know that their brain is capable of being very severely damaged by alcohol. The greatest organisation on this issue is the Australian Drug Foundation, and they've basically just changed their advice to parents. And if you could just take this away with you with respect to alcohol, try and delay alcohol introduction for as long as possible, preferably until 16, and maybe even till 18 if you can. I think this is one of the great challenges because, of course, we've got an industry who spends $1 million a day marketing this directly to your kids. So take care, look after them, and remember they're not impossible to deal with. Thank you very much.